All right, so let's talk about eggs. You've probably heard both sides of the argument, right? One group says eggs are the perfect food, packed with protein, vitamins, and healthy fats. The other group says, no, 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 eggs will clog your arteries and raise your cholesterol. So which is it? Are eggs your friend or your silent enemy? Now before we jump to conclusions, let's step back and think about why this topic even creates so much confusion. For decades, cholesterol has been portrayed as the villain. You see cholesterol and immediately think heart disease, blocked arteries, heart attacks. But here's what most people don't realize. About 500 bashers of your cholesterol is made by your own liver. Your body needs it. It's a raw material for hormones, for cell membranes, for brain function. Without cholesterol, you literally can't make new cells. So why do eggs get such a bad reputation? Well, an average egg contains roughly milligrams of cholesterol. And when researchers started noticing that people who ate more eggs also had a higher risk of heart disease, they assumed, aha, it must be the cholesterol in the eggs, but hold on a second. That's correlation, not causation. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one is causing the other. And that's where the controversy really starts. Now here's what's interesting. If you look at modern dietary studies, they're divided. Some say eating eggs daily increases your risk of dying from heart disease. Others say the effect is minimal or even non-existent when the rest of your diet is clean. So the question we should be asking isn't simply, are eggs bad? It's bad for whom? Let's think about the typical person in these studies. Are they eating eggs with vegetables cooked in olive oil? Or are they eating eggs with pancakes, bacon, hash browns, toast, butter, and a glass of orange juice? Because that combination, the refined carbs, sugar, and processed fats, is what actually triggers the inflammation and oxidative stress that damage your arteries. So it's not just the eggs, it's the metabolic environment those eggs enter. And that's the key idea I want you to keep in mind as we go through this. It's never just one food. It's the overall context of your metabolism, your liver function, your insulin levels, your inflammatory state. If your body is already overloaded, high insulin, fatty liver, poor gut health, then yes, even foods considered healthy can create a problem. But if your system is balanced, your insulin is low, and your liver is working well, eggs can be an amazing source of nutrients, choline for your liver, lutein for your eyes, B vitamins for your brain. So today, instead of demonizing eggs or glorifying them, let's actually understand what happens inside your body when you eat them, how cholesterol behaves, how it's transported, and what determines whether it helps you or harms you. Because once you understand why something happens physiologically, the confusion disappears. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack, step by step, starting with how cholesterol really works inside your body. All right, now let's really break this down, because if you understand how cholesterol actually works in your body, a lot of the fear around eggs and heart disease starts to fade away. First off, cholesterol isn't the enemy. It's not this sticky yellow stuff that just floats around waiting to clog your arteries. Think of cholesterol more like a building material. Your body uses it to make new cells, repair tissue, and even produce your hormones: testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, vitamin D. All of these depend on cholesterol. Without it, you wouldn't even be able to function. Now here's the part most people never hear. About your bash of your cholesterol doesn't come from food. It's made in your liver. Your body regulates it very tightly. When you eat more cholesterol, your liver usually makes less. When you eat less, your liver makes more. Why? Because your body needs a steady supply to keep everything running smoothly. So in many healthy people, eating a few eggs a day doesn't suddenly spike cholesterol through the roof. The body simply adjusts. Let's talk about the two types you've probably heard about, HDL and LDL. Everyone's been told HDL is the good cholesterol and LDL is the bad one. But let's be more accurate. Both are carriers. They're like little delivery trucks. So HDL carries cholesterol away from your arteries, taking it back to the liver for recycling. LDL carries cholesterol to your cells so they can use it. The problem isn't the LDL itself, it's what happens to it when your body's under stress or inflammation. Picture this, you've got these LDL particles delivering cholesterol to your cells, but if your diet is loaded with sugar and refined carbs, or your insulin is high, that LDL can become oxidized, kind of rusted. That's the version that sticks to the artery walls and triggers inflammation. That's when plaque starts forming. So, is the cholesterol to blame or the inflammation and oxidation process that damaged it? You see the difference? When someone has a healthy metabolism, low insulin, good liver function, minimal inflammation, cholesterol flows through the body smoothly. The liver packages it, sends it out, brings it back, and everything's in balance. But if the liver's fatty, if the person's insulin resistant, if they're eating high sugar or processed oils, now the whole system gets out of sync. Cholesterol starts to accumulate in the wrong places. So before blaming eggs or cholesterol itself, we have to ask, what's the condition of your liver? What's your insulin level? How much oxidative stress are you dealing with? Because if those are out of balance, your cholesterol numbers might look bad even if you haven't touched an egg in months. Think about that. The problem isn't necessarily the cholesterol in your diet, but the environment it's entering inside your body. It's like pouring clean oil into a dirty engine. It's not the oil that's the issue, it's the sludge already in the system. So the key takeaway here, cholesterol is essential, your liver is in control, and the real danger comes from inflammation and oxidation, not the cholesterol molecule itself. Once you understand that, you realize the conversation around eggs isn't about cholesterol. It's about metabolic health. And that leads us perfectly into the next point, what the actual research says about egg consumption and the risk of heart disease and how to interpret those studies correctly. Because the numbers can look scary until you know what's really going on underneath. All right, now that we understand what cholesterol really is and how it works in the body, let's look at what the actual research says, because this is where most of the confusion begins. You'll often see a headline that sounds alarming. Eating eggs increases your risk of dying from heart disease. It grabs attention, right? But the real question is, what do those studies actually show? Let's unpack that. Most of these studies are what we call observational. That means researchers look at a large group of people, they track what they eat, and they watch who ends up developing heart disease or dying from it. Sounds logical, but here's the catch. Observational studies can only show association, not cause and effect. For example, if you find that people who eat more eggs also have a higher rate of heart disease, that doesn't necessarily mean the eggs caused it. It might mean that the people who ate more eggs also ate more processed foods, smoked more, exercised less, or had other risk factors. You can't isolate the egg from the environment it's being eaten in. Now, let's dig a little deeper. When researchers control for things like smoking, diabetes, and overall diet quality, the risk often drops dramatically, sometimes disappearing altogether. That tells us the eggs weren't the main problem. It was the overall lifestyle and dietary pattern that went along with them. But here's something fascinating. Some studies have found that for certain groups, Like people with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, high egg consumption can correlate with increased heart risk. Why would that be? Because when your insulin is chronically high and your liver is fatty, your body's ability to manage cholesterol and fats gets impaired. So the same food, the same egg, behaves differently in a healthy body versus one that's metabolically damaged. That's why you can't look at one nutrient or one food in isolation. You have to look at the context of metabolism. Let me give you an example. Imagine two people. Person A eats 2 eggs every morning with spinach and avocado, stays low carb, exercises, keeps insulin low. Person B eats 2 eggs with toast, orange juice, and hash browns, high insulin, high sugar, high inflammation. On paper, both eat eggs daily, but their bodies are reacting in completely different ways. That's what's missing from most of these studies, the metabolic story behind the numbers. There's also a timing issue. Many of the earlier studies linking eggs to heart disease were done decades ago, when dietary fat was seen as the villain and people were eating a lot more refined carbs and processed oils. Today, when we factor in low-carb or ketogenic diets, the data look much different, in many cases showing neutral or even positive effects on HDL and triglycerides. So when you see those scary headlines, don't panic. Instead, ask, what kind of study was this? Who were the participants? What was their overall diet? Because once you dig into those details, it's clear the story is far more complex than eggs equal heart disease. So the real takeaway here is this: eggs themselves aren't inherently dangerous. It's how your body handles them that matters. And that depends on your liver, your insulin levels, and the amount of inflammation in your system. Next, we're going to look at why too many eggs, especially in the wrong metabolic state, might start causing problems inside the arteries. That's where we'll connect the dots between oxidation, inflammation, and plaque buildup. All right, so now that we've gone through what the studies say, let's go a little deeper into why too many eggs under certain conditions might actually create a problem for your heart. Because once you understand what's happening inside the body, the confusion about eggs and heart disease starts to make sense. First, remember this: your body isn't a simple calculator where you just add up cholesterol from food. It's a living, dynamic system. Everything depends on your liver, your insulin levels, your gut bacteria, and the level of inflammation you're dealing with. So when people say eggs raise cholesterol, that's only part of the story. The bigger question is, what's happening to that cholesterol once it enters your bloodstream? Here's how it works. When you eat eggs, especially the yolk, you're getting not only cholesterol, but also choline, a nutrient that's vital for brain and liver function. But in some people, gut bacteria can take that choline and convert it into a compound called TMA trimethylamine. Your liver then turns TMA into TMAO trimethylamine N oxide. Some studies have linked high TMAO levels to an increased risk of heart disease, because it may contribute to the oxidation of LDL, that rusting effect we talked about earlier. So it's not the egg itself that's the problem, it's how your gut and liver process it. If your gut microbiome is imbalanced or your liver is sluggish and full of fat, TMAO levels can climb. Combine that with high insulin, inflammation, and poor diet quality, and now the cholesterol in your blood is more likely to become oxidized and sticky. That's when it can start forming plaque inside your arteries. Think of your arteries like flexible garden hoses. In a healthy state, blood flows smoothly. Nothing sticks. But if the inner lining of those arteries becomes inflamed, maybe from high sugar, smoking, stress, or nutrient deficiencies, then oxidized LDL can start to adhere. Over time, your body tries to patch that area, and that's how plaque builds up. The real issue isn't the cholesterol itself, it's the inflammation and oxidation that damage the vessel walls. Okay, now, if someone's eating a clean, nutrient-dense diet, rich in antioxidants, leafy greens, and omega-6s, their LDL stays stable and less likely to oxidize. But if someone's eating eggs and processed foods, refined carbs, vegetable oils, now you've got a perfect storm. The insulin spikes, inflammation goes up, and cholesterol behaves differently in that environment. So when you hear too many eggs can be harmful, it's not just about the number, it's about your metabolic terrain. A healthy metabolism can easily handle a few eggs a day. But a body that's already inflamed, insulin resistant, and overloaded with toxins, that's when problems start showing up in blood work and eventually the arteries. Here's the big takeaway. It's never about one food in isolation. It's about the entire system, your liver health, your gut bacteria, your sugar intake, your stress levels. Eggs don't cause heart disease by themselves. They simply interact with the environment you've created inside your body. And that's why the next section is so important, because we'll look at balance. How much is too much? How can you enjoy the benefits of eggs without tipping that balance toward risk? That's where the practical side comes in. So now that we've gone through the mechanisms, what happens in your body when you eat eggs? How inflammation, oxidation, and metabolism all play a role. The next logical question is this: how much is too much? Because the truth is, it's not about eggs are good or eggs are bad. It's about how many, how often, and in what condition your body is in when you eat them. Let's start with the basics. 1 or 2 eggs a day for a healthy person. Someone with good liver function, low insulin, and a clean diet usually isn't a problem. In fact, for many people, that amount can actually improve their nutrient intake. Eggs contain choline, which helps support the liver, lutein and xanthan for the eyes, B vitamins for energy, and healthy fats that help stabilize blood sugar. So when your body's balanced, eggs can be a nutrient-dense food that fits beautifully into a clean diet. But if you're eating 6, 7, 8 eggs a day, and you've got a fatty liver, high triglycerides, or insulin resistance, now that's a different story, because in that situation, your body can't process fats and cholesterol properly. The liver starts to back up, LDL can become oxidized more easily, and you might see your blood work shifting in the wrong direction. It's not about the eggs, it's about how your body is processing what you eat. Now, there's another layer to this. It's not just how many eggs, but what you're eating with them. If your breakfast is eggs with spinach cooked in olive oil, avocado on the side, and maybe a cup of green tea, your body's going to respond completely differently than if you're eating eggs with toast, jam, fruit juice, and a stack of pancakes. Same eggs, different metabolic result. Why? Because the sugar and refined carbs spike insulin. And high insulin turns your body into fat-storing mode, promotes inflammation, and makes cholesterol behave badly. So even a healthy food can act differently when mixed into a poor metabolic environment. That's why moderation isn't just about portion control. It's about metabolic balance. Now, another question people often ask is, can I eat eggs every day if I'm on keto or low carb? In many cases, yes, because when carbs are low, insulin is lower, and your liver's not under as much pressure. But I still recommend variety. Rotate your protein sources, fish, chicken, sardines, grass-fed beef, so your body gets a broad range of nutrients. Too much of any one thing, even a healthy food, can create imbalances over time. Also pay attention to your body's signals. If you start noticing bloating, heaviness, or changes in your lipid profile, that's feedback. Your body's always talking to you. You just have to listen. So to answer the question, how much is too much? For most people, Santa beg eggs a week is a moderate range. Some can tolerate more, especially if insulin is well controlled. But if your liver's struggling or your insulin's high, you might want to scale it back and focus on improving those deeper issues first. Because here's the real key. When your body is metabolically healthy, food works for you, not against you. It's not about fearing eggs or any single food. It's about creating the internal environment where your body can handle them easily. And that brings us perfectly to the final point, the practical steps you can take to protect your heart, support your metabolism, and still enjoy your food without guilt or confusion. Let's wrap it all together. All right, so we've covered a lot: the controversy, the physiology, the research, and how your metabolism determines what happens when you eat eggs. Now let's bring this all together and talk about what you can actually do with this information. Because at the end of the day, knowledge is great, but it's the practical steps that change your health. Here's the first key point. Don't fear eggs, but respect balance. They're not your enemy. They're a natural food loaded with nutrients your body actually needs. The real issue isn't the egg, it's the metabolic environment inside your body. So before deciding how many eggs you can handle, focus on fixing the internal systems that manage cholesterol and fats, your liver, your insulin levels, and your overall inflammatory. Start by looking at your liver health. If you're dealing with fatty liver, bloating, or sluggish digestion, that's a signal that your liver might be overwhelmed. Support it by cutting out sugars and refined carbs, adding more cruciferous vegetables like kale, broccoli, and cauliflower, and making sure you're getting enough choline, which actually comes from eggs. You see how that works? When the liver's functioning well, cholesterol balance takes care of itself. Next, pay attention to insulin resistance. This one's big. High insulin drives inflammation, thickens the blood, and makes cholesterol behave badly. Lowering your insulin through intermittent fasting, lowering your carbs, and stabilizing blood sugar changes how your body handles fats completely. It's like switching from a clogged, smoky engine to one that runs clean and smooth. Now about inflammation, that's the silent trigger behind most heart problems. Inflammation oxidizes LDL, damages arteries, and sets the stage for plaque. You can reduce it by focusing on real, whole foods, lots of leafy greens, omega sands from salmon or sardines, olive oil, nuts, and seeds. Avoid vegetable oils, trans fats, and processed carbs. Those are the things that really set inflammation on fire. When it comes to eggs themselves, choose quality over quantity. Go for pasture-raised eggs if you can. They have a better fatty acid profile, more omega-cenes, less omega-mannose loke, and that makes a difference in lowering inflammation. And pair your eggs with the right foods, not bread and juice, but vegetables, avocado, or a salad. This combination keeps insulin low and balances your fat metabolism. Another practical tip: monitor your lipid profile over time. Don't panic over one number. Look at the full picture: HDL, LDL, triglycerides, and ratios. If your triglycerides are dropping and HDL is climbing, that's a good sign your liver and insulin are improving. Even if your total cholesterol rises slightly, your body is becoming more efficient. So what's the bottom line here? It's not about completely avoiding eggs. It's about creating the right internal conditions where eggs work for you, not against you. Support your liver, manage your insulin, keep inflammation low, and stay consistent. When your metabolism is healthy, the foods you eat stop being a threat and start becoming medicine. And that's the bigger lesson here. Real health doesn't come from eliminating single foods out of fear. It comes from understanding your body, fixing what's out of balance, and letting your physiology do what it was designed to do: heal, regulate, and thrive. Because once your body's in balance, you don't have to worry about every little thing you eat. Your system knows how to handle it, and that's the freedom real health gives you